edge. Welcome to the Touch MBA Admissions Podcast. Do you need help figuring out which schools to apply to or how to get into the world's top MBA programs? Hey, you're not alone. Join thousands of others on this podcast and on our site, touchmba.com, as they seek the admissions edge. And now, here's your host, Darren Joe.
What's up, guys? It's Darren. Welcome to the Touch MBA podcast. I know it's been a while. We didn't publish any episodes this past June. I was taking a break and I actually sent out an email to our list and heard back from so many of you telling me these great schools you got into. So that's always like the best part of my year is hearing about those results. Forgive me and us and our team for not producing an episode for a couple weeks, but we're back. Yes, and we're back in a big way because I brought on Alex Tuininga, who's actually an HBS grad, and we talk about his journey from military to MBA. We've gotten a lot of requests for this type of episode from those of you in the military looking to transition into studying for an MBA and then post-MBA corporate careers. So I think you'll get a ton of value from this really just open conversation I had with Alex. And even those of you who aren't from the military, but are from a non-traditional background, I think can still get, a lot of great insight from this episode. And we talk a lot about the HBS experience and what it's really like. And yeah, we talk about Alex's transition to getting a summer internship at BCG and then landing a full-time offer. And we walk through the stages of that. So you'll get a lot of great tactical advice. And also on the more personal side of things, Alex was an older candidate who was already married when he was applying for business school. And so we discussed that as well and how that affects social life. So I think you'll really enjoy this one. Remember that at touchmba.com, you can get free school selection help from us, as Alex did back in 2015. Good gracious, that's a long time ago. Can't believe we've been doing this for so long. But yeah, come to our site, touchmba.com. You can get a lot of free resources and feedback there. And yeah, all right, let's get to our conversation. Here we go. I'm actually staring at my guest because he's like half sideways here on the screen, but I cannot wait to interview him. We have a lot of listeners from all over the world and from many different functions and industries, but one big group of listeners I know we have are applicants who are from the military. And in fact, many of you have written into me to request an episode of a military applicant and what he or she did to get into a top business school and to learn from their experience. So I'm just so excited to bring our next guest on the show, Alex Tuininga, who first came to us in April 2015. Oh my gosh, that's over 3 years ago. But Alex, thank you for coming on to the Touch MBA podcast.
All right. Hi, Darren. Good to be with you.
Yeah. So Alex, could you give a quick intro about what you were doing before business school and what your goals were with getting an MBA?
Sure. I spent 10 years in the Navy prior to applying to business school, all as a naval intelligence officer. I did a few deployments early in my career and spent the last few years at a shore assignment in Washington, D.C. I came to that last assignment, a 3-year assignment, knowing that I was interested in MBA, but not knowing a ton about it. So I'll talk first about my interest. After spending a lot of time in the intelligence world and earning a degree in security studies, I came to really appreciate the value that business plays in society. This is something really important. It touches our day-to-day lives in immeasurable ways all around the world. So the food we eat, the clothes we wear, the homes we live in, how energy is delivered to us, how our nation states are tied together, the whole notion of global trade and security. Business is a part of all of these things. And as a military officer, like most people in the service, I mean, we're very mission oriented. We are attracted to uniformed service because we see value in what we're doing and never really have to really question that value. And a lot of people, I think, tend to view business in more transactional terms. There's this temptation to say, hey, it's just about winning and competing, increasing market share or shareholder returns. But I think when you step back and take a look at the whole of business, you realize that it's really doing something much more important than that, right? It's improving the quality of people's lives. And I mean, not to be too saccharine, but really being a part of that means you're being part of making the world a better place. At least you are if you're doing it ethically. So I was really attracted to that at sort of an abstract level. I think that's really important for me first. But that's certainly not enough. That might help you write a good admissions essay, but you got to think practically about what an MBA does. You're not writing poetry about the role of business in society. You're going to roll up your sleeves and get into it. So that's when I started reaching out to the vets networks at the various schools I was interested in, talking about what the jobs looked like, what they were doing afterwards. And then later on, talking to people actually in industry about their experiences and getting a sense of what it actually felt like on the ground. And, with all that information, I was able to conclude, hey, this is something I think I can do, something I want to do, and something I find value in.
Wow. Okay. So had this idea just been in the back of your mind? I mean, 10 years in service.
Yeah.
Like I'm sure it was in the back of your mind, but when did you finally take that step to start applying? What caused you to do that? Yeah.
So I'll say that the germs of it really began, it's going to sound maybe a bit strange, but it was the Arab Spring. So go back to spring 2011.
Yeah. And
the work I was doing in intelligence forced me to look at sort of the causes, right? What happened here? What was going on the ground? And I think a lot of what got played up in Western media was sort of a democratic revolt, right? And, a mass protest against restrictive, repressive regimes. But a lot of what I was reading was proving to me that there were economic injustices and people felt that they essentially couldn't sustain themselves economically. And if you look back at Tunisia and Mohamed Bouazizi, who self-immolated and started the whole thing, what he was upset about was that he wasn't able to operate a fruit truck, right, a cart and sell. And he said before he did it, or in the confrontation with the government official, how do you expect me to feed my family? So that was what got me thinking about this. But it took a few more years before I started taking concrete steps. So in the interim, I started doing a lot of what I described to you a moment ago, sort of reading about MBAs, what is an MBA education, what do they actually do there, what kind of jobs does it open up, are those jobs interesting to me, and then talking to people. But once I did that, and I'd say by late 2013, I had made up my mind that this was something I was going to go ahead and do. At that moment, I said, okay, all that abstract stuff and what I really want to be when I grow up and what schools I want to apply to, I'm going to put that on the side for right now. I'm going to do the one thing I can do that's a concrete step, and that was the GMAT. I spent the next 6 months focused exclusively on the GMAT, and I got to say that worked out pretty well for me.
Yeah, well, I hope I'm not outing you to our listeners, so to speak, but you did incredibly well on the GMAT. You scored a 780, and that's one of the highest scores I've ever seen with all the profiles that come through our site. So you had this outstanding GMAT. You clearly had strong work experience. You had a master's in security studies as well. But when you came to us, your goal was to get into management consulting. And I think we both agreed that you had a really strong profile, a very unique profile, very international profile, but that maybe your short-term goals of management consulting didn't really match up with your past experience. Or maybe they did, but it wasn't so obvious to me, at least. And so I'm wondering what you did to convince the schools you were applying to that you had that business acumen to jump into management consulting.
Yeah, I think the real key for me was being deliberate and concrete. It was going out and doing the research and figuring out what this job actually entailed. Top MBA programs send a ton of people into management consulting. That's not something they balk at when they see it on a career goals list on an application. Plenty of vets go into it. We can talk about that a little bit later. But it's not an unusual career goal. I think what an admissions committee is going to be on high alert for is if the career goal looks like a facade, right? If you say management consulting because, hey, I think I could get into it and that's what business schools produce, you should expect to get some deeper probing questions. And they're going to find out pretty quickly if you haven't done your homework. So figuring out what the job entails, whether or not you'd like it, whether or not you could do it, and why that fits in with what you've done is really appropriate. So for me, in talking to consultants and veterans who've gone into consulting about that experience, I got a good sense of the pros and cons, right? You get to work with clients and you travel and these are the types of projects you work on. And I say, hey, that actually sounds a lot like a job I once had in the Navy, a job I really liked a lot. So I was able to tell the admissions committee, hey, this sounds like something I used to do and enjoyed a lot. I think with an MBA, I could actually have some of those hard skills and build business vocabulary and could actually excel with this. So that's essentially convincing the admissions committee at a business school that I've got the business savvy to do this. It's a slightly different challenge convincing an interviewer at a consultancy. So with any professional interview, they're looking to slot you into an actual job, and you're going to be expected to perform certain functions. And a lot of interviewers, and certainly all the management consultancies, will walk you through a case interview. And you'll have to actually solve a business problem in a few short minutes and let this company that's interviewing you see how you think and how you're able to employ business ideas and vocabulary to solve a real life business challenge. So the MBA obviously prepares you a lot for that. But if you think this is something you want to do, or regardless of what you think you want to do, getting a sense of what the industry is all about, what the trends are, some of the language they use early, before you start the MBA program, I think is really critical to securing a job offer.
I think that's such good advice. And I mean, what else would you recommend to other applicants with a military background in terms of maybe common misconceptions or obstacles in the business school application process?
Sure. So a couple things. Military candidates are going to come in a lot of different flavors. Yeah, some will study business and econ as undergrads and they're ready for business school. Others, like me, studied history or the humanities, and some did English or theater or whatever. And it's a slightly more challenging sell. So sort of knowing the whole story behind and connecting those dots is really important. And along with that, I think one major misconception that military officers have is that their military experience, their military resume is going to be sufficient to set them apart. The truth is, if you look at these top MBA programs, they're bringing in basically the same number of military officers or candidates, applicants, every single year. So at Harvard Business School, 5% of the class, pretty much every year, is going to be composed of military candidates. And for a school of 950 people, we're talking about 50 slots for vets each year. As a military applicant, you're not competing against the general pool. They're not deciding between a West Point infantry guy and a Bain consultant. They're deciding between a West Point infantry guy and another West Point infantry guy and maybe a Princeton infantry guy. So you've got to make yourself distinct from your military peers, not from the general applicant pool. And I think that's where a lot of vets get kind of tripped up. Some other misconceptions that I've heard a lot really around the quantifiables, right? The GMAT and the GPA. So one thing I've heard is, hey, if you're a vet, scoring above 700 is probably going to get you looked at. Maybe. What I will say anecdotally from the people I've talked to is that they performed pretty well on both GPA and GMAT. And I'd be shocked if there was a huge delta between the general applicant pool, their metrics, and the vet pool.
Yeah.
So as a vet, maybe you do really have some unusual circumstances. I was really fortunate. I got to prepare for the GMAT while I was in DC. I was able to take a prep class locally. I had like a 9-to-5 type job, which a lot of vets don't get. I had a lot of things going in my favor. I was really, really fortunate. And a lot of guys, they're doing a tough deployment and they're studying GMAT while on a submarine and, getting 6 hours of sleep a night. So it can be really, really tough. So if, you've got some unusual circumstances, you can present that case, but if somebody tells you that, hey, as a vet, you only have to score 700 or 650 or whatever number they're throwing at you, you got to remember that like everybody's circumstances are unique and you should prepare for all of these things as though your numbers should be top notch and not sort of artificially lower the bar for yourself.
Oh, absolutely. I'm wondering, what was your strategy to do that?
Yeah. So, sticking with the theme of me being really lucky, I was a naval intelligence officer, and our careers tend to be really idiosyncratic and kind of interesting. They're the types of jobs that sound really cool on paper. I got to say I was stationed at Pearl Harbor and the Pentagon, and I worked with a special operations group, and I was involved in planning the allocation of strategic intelligence collection assets all over the world. Like, that sounds really interesting and cool.
Yeah.
If you're a more conventional, in the Navy, we would call unrestricted line, but a more conventional warfighter. If you're an infantry guy, if you're a pilot, if you're a surface warfare officer, those are really structured career paths with each of the services. And you can work really hard and perform exceptionally well and get great, fitness reports or OERs or what have you. And you might feel like, hey, this is really great, but translating that for an admissions committee is going to be tough. And the fact of the matter is, there are going to be more guys who have profiles similar to you, and making yourself differentiated is going to be, it's just going to be a higher degree of difficulty. For me, my career path being idiosyncratic, that's not a testament to my greatness, right? That is just a reality of the career path I was in. I got to do a lot of very different things that right away, like on paper, made me look different to an admissions committee.
No, absolutely. And I think that's great advice. Did you said you met with numerous MBAs, right, through veteran clubs, and luckily you heard our podcast and you came to us, but also many other admissions consulting sites and poets and quants. And I know you visited a lot of schools too. I'm wondering if there's anything, having just graduated from Harvard Business School, is there anything you wish you did differently in terms of researching and shortlisting schools? Because, of course, as you know, that's really what we try to help people with here at Touch MBA.
Yeah, so let me break it down in a few different parts. First, have full confidence that reaching out to the vets clubs and vets in industry is going to pay off. I mean, I was blown away at how willing people were to hop on the phone with me, a complete stranger knowing very little about me. If you read Vets Club and you don't hear anything back right away, don't feel discouraged. Don't think like, well, the Vets Club rejected me, so the admissions committee will, or something like that. The truth of the matter is, the MBA is a 2-year program. Everybody's busy all the time. It might be that the email address is no longer being managed, that the officers in charge of the club have turned over. That actually happened with the Vets Club at HBS this past year. There were 2 different email addresses. The website was directing emails to a legacy account. And so for like 3 months, nobody got a response. And the officers panicked at the end of the summer and said, oh my God, all these people think we're ignoring them and we're not. So be persistent and be confident people will reach out to you and do their best to help you out and give you all the information they can. As for me and my own personal process, I got to say my timing was really fortunate. Again, I was I was looking at Darren's podcast 3 years ago. I took the GMAT 4 years ago. I was locked into a 36-month set of orders for my last assignment, and just had a lot of time knowing that the MBA was what I wanted to do, and didn't have that time pressure sort of beating down on me. So I was able to prioritize the GMAT and prioritize school research, and then go out and take a trip to visit schools. And I was in Washington, D.C., where most of the schools I was interested in were within driving distance. Yeah. So I was really, really lucky. Most applicants are not that lucky, and you got to, figure out how to prioritize things given your own circumstances and situations. But I would just really encourage all of your listeners to be unafraid to pick up a phone or send an email, because you might be shocked at just how responsive people are.
For sure. And so we know you ended up at HBS, but where else? Yeah, what schools did you shortlist? And of course, why did you eventually choose HBS?
So there were a lot of schools on and off my lists at various points during this process. Ultimately, I applied to 4, and it was HBS and 3 schools in the Midwest. The 2 schools in Chicago, Booth and Kellogg, and then Michigan Ross as well.
Yeah.
I think I'm a little bit unusual there. I got to say, I think I met like 2 other HBS people who didn't apply to either Stanford, Wharton, or both.
Yeah.
There's a lot of prestige play at HBS.
Sure.
But for me, what my wife and I were interested in doing was relocating to the Midwest. We were really attracted to this region and quality of life and affordability. And I hadn't lived in the Midwest in 25 years. My wife has never lived here. We've got some friends in this area, but the fact of the matter is we didn't have an extensive network. And I thought, hey, as I'm transitioning from the military to the private sector, I'd like to start building that network and meeting people who are in that area. And the Midwest schools are obviously going to send more people to Chicago, Minneapolis, and Detroit. But HBS was always really intriguing to me. And it truly was not the name brand and prestige and all the rest of it. My wife and I took a visit to the campus back in 2014, before I ever applied. Really liked the community a lot. Loved how most students live on campus.
Yeah. Love
that the people who don't live on campus all live within walking or biking distance of it. It feels like it's sort of a small town, just a really good atmosphere. And the section experience, right? Your first year at HBS is all required curriculum. And that massive class of 950 people is broken down into 10 sections of 95 apiece. Each is supposed to be a representative cross-section. And it's just like elementary school, right? You're in an assigned seat with the same people every day. And you get to see them at their best, and you get to see them at their worst. And you get to really know a diverse group of people in a really intimate way that is unlike anything I've ever experienced at an academic institution. And I'm just crazy about those people. I love those people to death. And we're already staying in contact with each other. And every month in your birth month, you are supposed to write a little life update and send it to all 95 people. And we're already getting them. We graduated last month, and I'm already seeing them. And every time one pops into my inbox, I'm thrilled. I can't wait to read what Siddharth is doing or Ramon is up to. So it's a really special experience, and I valued it tremendously. In the abstract, it sounded really appealing to me, and then actually getting to experience it for 2 years was really special.
Yeah, because it's crazy. We've actually never had a Harvard Business School student on the podcast, and obviously, HBS I believe is the biggest MBA brand, business school brand in the world. And I mean, would you say that the best part of your experience was that section experience and getting to know those 90 people so intimately? I'm just curious, having just finished, what you found to be the best part of the whole thing, the real best part of the whole thing for you, as opposed to just the name brand.
Yeah, right. Truly the best part for me was the people.
Yeah.
And I think the way the experience is broken down, first year required curriculum, second year elective curriculum, and you pick the classes you want, and you start to realize, hey, here's somebody I didn't know, but we're in 4 of the same classes together. We obviously have a lot of shared interests. Let's start talking. And you start to realize, like, oh, this person I know knows that person, and your social group evolves. But truly, HBS, I think like 90% of the people who are admitted end up enrolling. It's a very exciting place, an immersive place where you're focused on the education. Everybody's really excited to be there. And very few people are from Boston. It's not a business school where people sort of like disappear into their city, the city they already knew with the friends they already had before. Like, it's a really immersive experience where people are there to forge new connections with each other. And the learning model, the case method, is actually designed to reinforce it. The case method has strengths and weaknesses, and everybody's got an opinion about, how effective it is and whether it's good, bad, or other. But what I think more than anything it does is it forces students to speak up, listen to each other, really hear different perspectives, and learn from each other. There's just a ton of peer learning. It's a very social learning environment. And given the intimacy, particularly of that first year experience with all these people you're spending a year with, that's really hard to replicate. And I got to say, more than the brand, more than the posh country club campus, right? More than anything else, the thing that school has going for it are people who are excited to be there and excited to connect with one another and excited to teach each other.
Yeah, I mean, see, it's so interesting. Like, you're in that section group, but the HBS class is huge, right? So I'm wondering, like, what that was like. I mean, especially, I guess, moving into the elective stage, or just, all the extracurricular activities that are going on, and networking opportunities and informational interviews you're doing, right? I'm sure with your classmates in different industries. Like, are there people you just don't know? Has to be, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So this is the funny thing. So about halfway through my last year, the elective curriculum year, I started saying to people, hey, I feel like I probably know half the people here. I have opportunities to interact with a field where you get broken down into a new group and you get sent overseas. And then, you take elective curriculum courses and you've got new people and you've got clubs and social engagements and you get to know more people. And I'm like, yeah, I probably know like half the people here, maybe even more. And then graduation day comes. And you watch all these names read aloud on stage and people walk up and you're like, I don't know anyone. Like, this school is huge. Who are all these people? I've never seen these people before.
It's crazy. That's crazy.
Yeah, it is nuts. Now, for some people, that would make them insane. If you went to like a small liberal arts school and you knew everybody inside and out, like that would be a major problem. For me, I went to a big school. I went to UC Berkeley as an undergraduate. You got 33,000 undergrads. You're always this person bumping into people. But what HBS does really well with that section experience and the clubs and all the rest of it, they're able to recreate a small school experience within a larger campus. Mm-hmm. And what's very cool is you've got some people you feel like you know really, really well. And then beyond that immediate group, you've got this like really massive network, and you're always a degree or two removed from everybody on that campus. Somebody you know knows everybody there. Yeah. So yes, it feels massive. No, I definitely didn't know everybody, but I never felt like they were strangers and I was just a number on a page or anything like that.
Absolutely. Hate to put you on the spot, but do you think anything could have been improved with your experience there? Don't worry. No one from Harvard, no one from Harvard's admissions or marketing staff is listening to this anyway, so feel free to speak your mind.
You might be surprised. So, I think it's worth, there's a long tradition of Harvard and HBS specific critique. A few years ago, there was a New York Times piece looking at the school, at the institution, and it was highly critical of a lot of what it saw. Last year, the Golden Passport came out, which looked at HBS's role in society and shaping modern capitalism, and is also very, very critical. Are some of those things there? Well, like all business schools, it can't get 50% female enrollment, right? I think HBS is up to 44 now, but that's the opening part of the funnel. When you talk about the case protagonists and the faculty and everything else, you still have a major representation challenge. And what I will say is the school understands that and is, in my opinion, doing a tremendous amount of work to correct that. I found them very sensitive and responsive to student needs and concerns. This is an institution very much aware of its reputation and is making an earnest, concerted effort to get better. You go back to the school's mission, right, to educate leaders who make a difference in society, in the world. It takes that seriously. I really honestly believe that this school's got a mission-oriented focus. It looks at what its graduates have accomplished and recognizes that, hey, the people who come here end up throwing around a lot of weight and can really have a tremendous impact on the world. So we need to be very careful and thoughtful about what we're teaching them here and who comes out of here. So can things be better? Sure, absolutely, right? But I think the school knows that it can and should be better and is trying to make it so.
Yeah, I mean, did anything else surprise you about the experience, with?
Yeah, I might be presaging another one of your questions, but the thing that surprised me the most, like, everybody's coupled up. Now, I'm married, and I've been for 7 years. My wife and I just celebrated our 7th wedding anniversary.
Congratulations.
Thank you kindly. Appreciate that. So, lucky 7. So, the school, I thought we were going to be outliers, right? I thought, look, I've seen the average age, and I know that, professional career-oriented people, like, they've probably been focusing on their jobs and don't have partners or whatever. I swear more than half are in long-term committed relationships. And my single friends actually seem to struggle more with the scene because it is such an intimate learning environment. The people you get to know best are people you're not going to get away from. And so, there's a lot of reservation, I think, for people to sort of connect and couple up.
Really?
Because, like, hey, what if it goes wrong, right? What if it goes bad? Like, we're still going to be around. Now, there's an irony in me saying that. The irony is I talked a lot about our section 95. Our class here, we were known as the love section. We had five couples formed inside our section. So that's 10 people involved in a relationship with somebody inside our section, 10% of our section. Yeah. Nobody else was anything close to that, right? Maybe one or two, but we were, definitely the outlier. So if we were the most romantic section, right, with 5 couples, and then you factor in all the people with long-term committed relationships who showed up married or got engaged or got married during this process, there just aren't a lot of other people, single people, left for that scene. So that was fine for me, right? I'm a married guy, and my wife and I love hanging out with other couples, and they come over to our place for dinner. We go out to a restaurant. Like, it's lovely and wonderful. But what surprised me the most was just how normal that was when I was expecting a place of young single people in their 20s throwing lavish parties.
Yeah, exactly.
A very different environment.
That's really surprising to me because I who did I have on? My good friend Andrew from MIT Sloan basically said the opposite. And I would have thought that MIT Sloan would have been more like what you're saying about Harvard. And what you're saying about Harvard would have been more MIT Sloan. But, that's interesting.
There's a joke somewhere in there about HBS students' natural aversion to risk. But I'm not going to make it.
Yeah, or maybe I'm surprised they weren't going outside their section to look for boyfriends and girlfriends. But
there's definitely some of that. Look, I mean, there's plenty of that as well. But the fact of the matter is, like, for single folks, there's so many demands on your time. The recruiting process takes up a ton of time. Your investment in class preparation, clubs, and all the rest of it, that investing a lot of time getting to know somebody that you're not seeing and interacting with on a regular structured basis is actually tough. And the truth of the matter is people just don't have a lot of time for it.
For sure. And so did you already answer my question this whole, do you have any advice, Alex, to married applicants and older applicants? Because even actually when you wrote us, you wrote, hate to out you here, but you were like, I'm 32 and I'm a little bit worried about my age and career goals, right? Getting into consulting. So you didn't feel that effect so much?
I didn't. You're absolutely right. I was really nervous about that going through this application process. And at an interview, actually, I talked with another veteran applicant who said that he had already gotten a rejection letter from a school and told you should apply for the exec ed program because you're too old. Actually, they didn't say too old. Of course, you can't say too old, but it was you have so much work experience, right? You should be applying for an exec ed program instead. And I heard that again. This is I think it was my second interview. Yeah. I talked to a guy. I'm like, then I'm sweating, right? Then I'm really nervous that this is not going to work out. But it didn't seem to be an issue for me with the application process. Mm-hmm. I know a handful of people who were around my age. I know 2 or 3 who were definitely older than I was in our HBA class. Now, a class of 950, if I'm the third oldest, I'm still obviously an outlier. But I wasn't the oldest that I expected to be once I came in. And at any rate, there were some people. I've got a good friend who ended up getting admitted as well, who's like 3 weeks younger than I am. So that was wonderful. I was not so much an outlier. And for the social scene, certainly wasn't an issue at all. So know if you're an older applicant, right, you've got to have a compelling story for why you didn't apply earlier. For vets, this tends to be easier. We tend to have service obligations. I had one myself that extended me a good bit out. So if you got 10 years of work experience, but there wasn't you didn't have the Department of Defense telling you, hey, you need to sign up for another 5 years, then you'd better have a really compelling reason why you didn't apply previously.
I think that's really good advice. And so if I may ask, did your wife find a job in Boston or Cambridge, or was she studying something else? What was her story?
Yeah. So my wife is a nurse and she was working in a coronary care ICU in Washington, D.C. before we came up to Boston. And originally, she wasn't sure she would come with me to business school. We thought we might be a long-distance couple. But she ultimately decided, she came up for Admitted Students Weekend at HBS, fell in love and said, we're coming here, we're doing it together. I had already sent in my dorm room application, and dorm rooms are very much single-person dorm rooms at HBS. I had to rescind that and say, hey, actually, we're not going to do a dorm. My wife is going to come up after all. It worked out so well. She applied for jobs. Ended up working at Mass General Hospital in the same unit she had been in DC. And I'm not kidding. She started orientation at that hospital the same day I started at HBS.
Man. Yeah.
So we've seen the other side of this. We have done the move where she can't find work and it's a struggle and terrible. But this one was as seamless as possible.
And how was she involved in your Harvard experience? Because I think, and to our listeners, we've actually rarely covered this side. We're usually talking about, recruiting hardcore or what makes this school different and that. But I think this is such an important part of the business school experience, especially if you're in a relationship and figuring this stuff out. So what did she meet other significant others, or is she kind of like part of the class? How does that work?
I'm really glad you asked. And I think that's a really important question. And that was a huge part of our decision calculus with HBS. So first thing, I talked earlier about the community feel at HBS and everybody being sort of part of that campus community, geographic proximity and all the rest. And my wife's ability to feel part of that networking community was very much a part of our decision-making process. I'll tell you, she and all the spouses were additional members of the section, all the section social events. And really, the section is the heart of the social life the first year. My wife came to all of them. They're always welcome and open. My wife is a much more charming person than I am, so they love her better. I can't tell you how many section mates said, I like your wife so much better than you.
Sorry, man.
She was warmly, hey, it's how it goes. I married up. It's fine. So she was warmly embraced, and we had anticipated that, but it was confirmed by our experience, and that was wonderful. So for her, she definitely knew plenty of HBS people, connected with my section mates. She connected with other spouses. We were, very, very well taken in. But she also had her own social network at work with her peers at work. And so she was sort of straddling both worlds, whereas I had just one, right? Just fully immersed in the HBS world. But I think it was a really positive experience. The biggest challenge for us was the first year and sort of compartmentalizing, because my wife would look at my schedule, see how long I was in classes. Like, hey, you're done at classes at 1:30 today. Why aren't you home? Right? It's like,
exactly.
The MBA experience is really immersive. I have like 6 meetings. I've got all these phone calls. I've got recruiting things to do. And I want to sneak in a workout at the gym. So it took us a little while to get into a rhythm where we felt sort of comfortable with all of that, with saying, hey, I'm going to be out of the house until 7 or 8 p.m., but even though I'm done with class at 1:30. So we talked about that and worked that out and started to get more familiar with each other's schedules, and things got better. But I think just talking in open communication and transparency about that is really important. And I mean, I guess my advice here is, all of the people you're interacting with might be really busy and sort of understand what this MBA lifestyle is all about. But your partner, no matter how much of you they're seeing and how much they seem to understand, may not be able to fully appreciate it because they're not living it themselves. So to engage in that open dialogue, I think, is really important.
Yeah, because it sounds like that first year, especially that first semester, is just kind of like, whoa, overload, right? You got your core courses, you're getting to know everybody. And that's when everyone probably has the most FOMO, so to speak. And
that's exactly right.
Hasn't quite figured out like where they're focusing.
That's right.
So, well, let's actually, well, first of all, I really appreciate you sharing that. And, but let's talk about that first semester, because again, you wanted to jump into consulting, and the recruiting process starts right away, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So, I mean, like, what do you have to say about that, recruiting process? I'm sure hundreds of your classmates are applying for the same roles. Like, I mean, please share with our audience, like, your experience and what you learned from it.
Yeah. So, I mean, the most important thing is, I know there's a lot going on. You get admitted to an MBA program, and you got to figure out where you're going to live and what you're going to do with all your stuff and how you're going to get there. And if you're married, what your partner's going to do. And there's a lot to deal with. And then you've got classes and the crusher classes, and you want to, pass your classes, and you want to do well academically.
You don't have to pass your classes. No one has to do that. That's not important. I'm just kidding.
The failure rate is pretty low. It's worth noting. That said, there's a lot to do, for sure. I think the best advice I can give is, do not put off thinking seriously about not just your career, but interview prep until recruiting season, right? Because at that point, especially for vets who don't have experience in industry, you're way behind the ball. There are a lot of people who are building on it. There are fewer people taking a radical left turn with their career than you might be inclined to believe based on a lot of what's floating out there online. There are a lot of people who are building on past experiences, and especially if you are trying to recruit for something a little bit off the beaten path. If you're not going into banking, you're not going to consulting or consumer goods or something that brings in a lot of MBAs each year and knows what that path looks like, you've got to be able to convince those companies that you're appropriate for the job they have in mind for you. And I know a lot of people who came from consumer goods and were going back into consumer goods and just wanted a different role, right? Maybe they were in logistics and now they want to be into marketing or something like that. But they know that industry, they know the language. As a vet, you don't. So you've got to get caught up to speed. With consulting, there's a lot of information out there online about what that interview process looks like. Books on how to prepare for the case method, YouTube clips on it. I recommend digesting that stuff right away. Start doing that preparation before you get to business school. Start making the phone calls. Get yourself prepared mentally for what that interview process is going to look like, what questions are going to come up, and talking to people working those jobs so you have a realistic sense of what those are like. That's what the recruiters are going to be looking for, and they're going to be able to sniff out anybody who's trying to blow smoke. Mm-hmm. So it's tough. The more narrow your focus is, the better off you're going to be. If you're applying for jobs in 6 different industries, you're probably not going to do any of them particularly well. Having a really laser-like focus on what you want to do is probably the best chance you've got of securing an offer.
Yeah, so you were just looking at management consulting. You didn't allow yourself to look at tech or whatever else.
Yeah, I dangled my toe in the water for a few other things, but the fact of the matter is I didn't do a ton of prep for them because I wasn't as interested in them as I was in management consulting. It was more curiosity. Let me get a few more reps in with some other interviews. Right. But, suffice it to say, I didn't get an offer from either those other ones, and that's not super shocking. Yeah, I was mostly interested in management consulting. That's where I put most of my effort. That's where I did most of my networking. And I was able to really convince those companies that, hey, I've taken this seriously. I've thought deeply about this. I know what this job looks like, and I think I can do it well.
So on that note of get up to speed, read those books, check out those websites, YouTube videos, like would you have any recommended resources for management consulting that really helped you?
Yeah, so I'll name 2 that I think are pretty well known. One is Case Interview Secrets. You can look up that book on Amazon. Another is Case in Point, actually. Lots of tools and tricks. A third is a video series, a guy by the name of Victor Chang. Yep. He's got workshops and all sorts of packages you can buy. So take a look at those. To be honest, Case in Point and Case Interview Secrets are fairly cheap, and you could probably buy them used even cheaper. So all the people who got through the interview process and want to unload those books, they're out there. So yeah, I would just buy those. And with all the online tutorials and workshops, take a look. You can watch some YouTube videos and get a sense of what these things are all about. And if you decide, hey, I like this works for me, I'm willing to pay a premium to get more advanced help, you can do that. And if not, that's fine too. There are plenty of people who get these offers without spending hundreds of dollars on workshops of preparation. But just make sure if you do that, you are going out and doing mock interviews with your classmates and anybody who's willing to help.
Yeah, no, we'll link to those books. That's awesome. Okay, so, well, first, anything else that you can share from securing that internship? So we should tell the audience you landed in an internship with BCG in Boston, correct?
That's correct.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, did you have anything else there?
I don't think I've got any other advice. I think prep is really the name of the game. Yeah. Prep and networking, right? Yeah. If you are able to show that, hey, I've talked to people actually in this office, it's very network driven. People know who other people are. And if you say, no, I've never talked to anybody in this office, they're going to really question how invested you are in that office. Actually, one other piece of advice that's really important with consulting, you do want to recruit for the office you want to be in. So we knew for last summer, we wanted to be in Boston. We were contemplating staying in Boston long term instead of coming to the Midwest. Ultimately decided this was what we wanted to do, and it worked out fine for us. But make sure it's great if you want to be in LA to talk to people in New York and Dallas and Atlanta and everywhere else, but really keep your search targeted on LA specifically. The other bit of advice that I think is important is understand the different firms' reputations and cultures. People talk about the big 3, that McKinsey, Bain, and BCG, and I think we tend to hand wave the differences between them a lot. But the truth is, the consultancies are all very aware of what the differences between them are and what their reputations are. And if you're trying to convince McKinsey to give you an offer, you need to figure out how they're different from Bain and BCG, not just, well, McKinsey's McKinsey, right? And the same goes for the other ones.
Yeah. No, that's a great tip. And so let's move forward, well, back in time, but forward to when you got that internship, first year is over, you're going to start at BCG, but that's not really your jam, right? That we talked about. Like, I mean, you didn't have that quote unquote business background.
Yeah.
Were you scared, nervous, or did you feel like you could step in right away and contribute? Or was there a steep learning curve?
So a little bit of both. Yeah, this is interesting. So, really good question. What I will say is the transition from military to business school was nothing compared to the transition from military to consulting. And the reason I say that is I've been in academic settings before. I'm comfortable speaking in class and doing homework and all the rest. That's fine. It's a peer learning environment. You just need to be yourself and connect with people and just have a good attitude. School was easy. Consulting, a professional environment, is definitely different. And for me specifically, and I think for vets, I was stunned at how much sort of unwritten, unofficial military isms had just crept into my working style and how different they were from the corporate setting. And communication is really the biggest piece of that. So in the military, the most important thing is to be direct and concise. Ambiguity is the enemy, right? If I need to direct you, Darren, to walk 50 yards from here, right, and man a post, I'm going to tell you that directly, right? I have no problem writing in a slide, Darren will walk 50 yards to the post and stand there. That is not a problem. Some of that works well with consulting, right? You do want to be fairly clear in your language, but there is a softening of that language that was very difficult for me to really wrap my arms around. And I'm a guy who thinks he's pretty good with words, so that was a challenge. The other bit of this closely related is just feedback. In the military, if you screw up, somebody tells you you screwed up. And they tell you in no uncertain terms, and they make it clear that you won't do it again. In consulting, the feedback is constantly, that's a really good start. What do you think you should do next? And I would come home every week and I would tell my wife for the first half of the internship, I don't have the faintest idea how I'm doing.
Yeah, that's crazy.
I know I'm brand new to this job. I know I don't really know what I'm doing. I know I'm not producing high quality work, but I know I'm working my best and I have a good attitude about it. My feedback suggests I'm doing great, but I know that's not true. So my advice here is keep the focus on your attitude, right? If you're BCG, there's a phrase we use a lot, hungry but humble. You got to be hungry to learn, but you got to be humble about the fact that you don't know much and you have a lot to learn. So long as you're positive and you accept feedback eagerly and you do everything with a smile on your face, you're going to be well received, and I think you're going to excel. I think that's what served me well. That's how I got the full-time offer. That's how I ended up having a great relationship with the partner I worked for and the team I had. It was my attitude and my willingness to learn and work hard much more than the actual work I produced.
That's interesting because, I'm sure the work you produced was better than you say, but I mean, if you think about this situation, because you're trying to get the full-time offer, the company is looking to give people full-time offers. How much time, how long is that actual summer internship? Is it specified 12 weeks or?
So mine was 10 weeks. And I think 10 weeks is standard for consultancies. There are some that are 12. There are some that are 8. And just one little quick aside, there are people who do multiple internships. Last summer, going into internship season, all of us at HBS were told of this horror story of a guy whose dream internship fell through like the week before. And he ended up calling all the companies he recruited for and made this like custom internship. He did 10 one-week internships over his summer. So that's pretty unusual. That's an outlier. But outside of like banking and consulting and the really structured things, a lot of these internships, especially for people looking at tech and startup land and small companies, they're really sort of handcrafted and tailored to the individual. So if that's your angle, that's what you want to do, know that there's some flexibility there.
No, absolutely. But so if your consulting internship is 10 weeks, like when do they make decisions? I mean, like by the 8th week, because like I'm just thinking a pure timeline, right? Like you're talking about getting concrete. It's like, oh my gosh, like you have a month and a half to like show that attitude, produce good work, and also learn about yourself, whether it's something you want to do as well. But I mean, that's not a lot of time. So I'm just thinking, like how does that work?
Yeah. So the internship is 10 weeks, and the first week of that is actually orientation and training. So you get 9 weeks with the people evaluating you and deciding whether or not to extend you a full-time offer. I believe it's the 5th week, 5th or 6th week. You'll sit down with your supervisor, or at least this was the case at BCG.
Right.
I would imagine it's a standard, though. Halfway into your time with your team, they'll sit you down and say, this is your midterm counseling, and this is how you're doing, and essentially you're on track for an internship or a full-time offer, or you're off track, and here's how you can correct. I will say for me, that midterm feedback was the best thing that happened to me. I spent those first few weeks going, I have no idea how I'm doing. I got the midterm feedback. It's like, you are on track. You're doing great. Keep it up.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay. Awesome. I was able to this is working out. Good. I got a lot more confidence after that and stayed on track. And I didn't find out about the full-time offer literally until the last day. It is the final day of your 10-week internship. But I will say,
so they basically work you to the bone, and then even if they know, I'm just kidding. Just kidding.
What I will say is, I think that people who don't get full-time offers on that final day know so before that final day. So if you were told at the midterm point that you're on track and nothing terrible has happened since, I wouldn't panic on your last day of the internship.
Right. Yeah. So, so I mean, congrats, you got the full-time offer on that last day of your internship, and now you're like, whoo, what do you do that second year?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm half joking. I'm half joking.
Well, that was the running joke for all of the second year. What I will say first of all is I was under the impression that most people would have their internship lined up going into second year, or excuse me, full-time offer lined up heading into second year, and it would be a party for everybody. I was actually in the minority, and I remember the career services department putting out some stats early on saying, I can't remember what it was, but like entering second year, like so September starting your second year, only like 20% of people had full-time offers or had accepted a full-time offer, right? And the bulk of folks are still out there recruiting. Now, a lot of those folks may have been sponsored by their previous employer, and they're just sort of like testing the waters to see, hey, is somebody else going to like double my salary here, right? Am I going to get that dream offer with a small company where I can be the 6th employee? Can I make that happen? And if it doesn't, they return to their previous employer. So some of those numbers are a little misleading, I think, if you just look at them at face value. But the fact of the matter is there's a lot of recruiting energy throughout the second year. And so when you're somebody like me who's got your offer in hand and most of the people you know are still flailing and like trying to land something, prepare for interviews, you feel really good about yourself. You're like, this is wonderful. My life is great. I'm seeing people. I'm going to restaurants. I'm having cocktails and putting my feet up, and I feel pretty good. So I don't want to understate the amount of academic work I still did, or the involvement with clubs, or the rest of it, but it was definitely much easier for me second year than first year. There's fewer demands on my time, and I got to enjoy that moment a bit more than the folks who were still recruiting.
Yeah. It's rough. We've had a couple of people on the podcast who, didn't get their offers till the last day of school, or even, 4 months out. So
yeah,
it's pretty crazy. So I just have two more questions for you. This has been just a great conversation. So the first one was just, any other tips? Well, actually, I'm curious where you saw your military MBA peers heading into. Like, did you see a lot of them heading into management consulting like yourself, or would you say it was a pretty good spread of, transitioning into finance and strategy and startups?
Yeah, I'd say a pretty good spread. So again, we've got about 50 military officers admitted into HBS, and I would guess the career stats are pretty similar in general to those of the general student population. I mean, I know people, plenty going into consulting, plenty going into finance, and I know a few in tech. I know a guy who interned at SpaceX last year, and
cool.
A woman who was at Google, and I know a guy who's going into hedge funds now. But what I will say is, if you think, I'll say for me personally, I knew I wanted a structured path where I would continue to learn. I was not comfortable leaving an MBA program and becoming the fourth employee at a small company and wearing a bunch of different hats and performing a bunch of business functions when I had no private sector experience. Other people feel much more comfortable and confident for whatever reason, and that's perfectly fine. But for me personally, that wasn't ever something I wanted to do. I was really excited about consulting. I remain very excited about consulting for a host of reasons, but that's go into all sorts of different fields. What I will say is, the further off the beaten path you go as a vet, the more challenging it is. And I'll give one quick example. A buddy of mine came out of the Army and knew he wanted to go into hedge funds, but wasn't really interested in doing like a traditional couple-year stint at Goldman or JP Morgan, and said, I want to go directly into hedge funds. And he got out of the Army, I think it's spring of the year before he started at HBS. And he went and interviewed at hedge funds in Chicago. And one of the firms said, you're definitely not getting a paid internship. We're not doing it. You don't know anything. But we will let you do an unpaid internship. And he spent whatever it was, a month or two, as an unpaid intern, crashing on a friend's sofa in Chicago to get some experience.
Wow.
And then continued to network and stay in touch with them, and landed a full-time offer. I'm not sure if it was with that firm or another one, but got to go directly into hedge funds without doing a more traditional finance flavored thing before. Now, he worked really, really hard, and I mean, those hedge fund guys tend to do that, and made a lot of sacrifices to get there. So it is possible, right? You can find these opportunities, but you really do have to make them happen. You got to get out there and hustle, and you may have to eat some humble pie and say, hey, this company's not going to be super excited about my military experience and say I'm the greatest guy in the world because I spent 5 years as an infantryman. Instead, say, hey, I'm back at the bottom of the totem pole. Let me pay my dues and eat some humble pie as I prove my worth.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder how many HBS students take unpaid internships. That's a stat I want to know, but that shows, exactly what you're saying. Illustrates your point. Amazing. Yeah, no, I think our listeners will really appreciate that advice. And so, Alex, my last question to you is, you just graduated from HBS a month ago. You're about to start your new job if you haven't started already. Like, what did you learn about business from business school? Being a, Navy intelligence guy, being in the military, like, what did you learn about business in business school? I mean, I think I'd love to hear your thoughts.
That's a good question. I guess I'll return to sort of the theme that I tried to outline at the top of the podcast. Business school, more than anything, refined my understanding of the role that business plays in society. That was something I was inclined to believe before coming to HBS, but Harvard Business School in particular, as I said, takes its mission statement very seriously. And more than anything, the constant theme throughout my 2 years at HBS was what we do matters. It affects people's lives. And this is society, right? I mean, business really does shape society. And so we have an obligation to do it right and do it ethically and to take into account considerations that aren't on the balance sheet, right? We've got to think about the various stakeholders in society at large. We've got to think about the environment, and we've got to talk about income inequality, and we've got to talk about human dignity and jobs and what a sustainable wage looks like and the intersection with government. So that's the most important thing I learned. The other thing closely related is that the profit motive isn't wrong or bad or evil. It is simply an engine for capitalism, right? It's returns and the promise of increased returns is what makes economic activity sustainable. And so, when we think about this particularly, we have declining trust in some of the bedrock principles of international global capitalism, right? Increasing skepticism about trade, anger about income inequality, historically low levels of trust in corporations and in business leaders to do the right thing. This is a really important moment to sort of step back and figure out how business can be better, right? With acknowledging that, yes, we have an obligation to shareholders and we have to be profitable, like businesses aren't charities. But within that framework, we've got an obligation to deliver high quality values and services to people that, in all earnestness, make the world a better place. So, yeah, to sum up, I think that's what I learned the last 2 years.
Very cool. Well, let's end it here. Alex, thank you so much for your time and insights and taking some time off your packing schedule, your unpacking schedule, I should say, to join us on the show. Great chat. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Darren. I appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to the Touch MBA podcast. Don't be shy. We have a mailing list. Go to touchmba.com and get yourself signed up. And we'll keep you posted with the best tips and insider interviews on how to get into your number one school. You can also find us on Twitter and Facebook at Touch MBA. See you soon.